The year was 1857, and America's untamed frontier stretched endlessly before those brave enough to seek their fortune in the West. For 17-year-old Josephine McKinley, that journey began inside a flour barrel, her wedding dress stained with the flour that concealed her, as she listened to the screams of her family and fellow travelers being slaughtered by raiders outside. Little did she know that this moment of terror would be the crucible from which an extraordinary life would emerge, one that would see her raised by traveling merchants, mastering the art of survival, and eventually becoming one of the most respected traders on the western frontier. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The April morning had dawned crisp and clear, perfect for a wedding. Josephine had smoothed the wrinkles from her modest white dress as the wagon train prepared to stop for the celebration. After traveling for 3 weeks from Independence, Missouri, the caravan leaders had finally agreed to halt for one day so that Josephine could marry William Parker, the young blacksmith who had joined their party in St. Joseph. The overland trail to Oregon Territory was dangerous, but the large wagon train of 28 vehicles provided safety in numbers. Josephine's father, Henry McKinley, a former banker with dreams of establishing a new financial institution in Oregon City, had insisted they travel with the largest group possible. "Today's the day, Josie," her mother Rebecca had whispered, excitedly as she helped secure the small white flowers in her daughter's chestnut hair. "Your father wasn't sure about William at first, but he's proven himself on this journey." Josephine nodded, her stomach fluttering with nerves. At 17, she was younger than many brides, but frontier life demanded early partnerships. William, at 22, had strong hands and a gentle manner, qualities her practical mind recognized as valuable for the challenges ahead. The caravan had stopped near a small creek, with rolling hills providing a natural amphitheater for the ceremony. The women of the train had transformed one wagon into a makeshift chapel, draping it with the few luxuries they had carried from their former lives: embroidered tablecloths, a lace shawl, strings of colored glass beads. "Miss McKinley," Thomas Reed, the caravan master, approached with an apologetic expression. "We need to move some supplies to make room for the ceremony. Would you mind if we relocated the flour barrels from your family's wagon?" "Of course not," Josephine replied, smoothing her dress. "I'll help." "No need to soil your wedding dress," Thomas insisted. "My boys will handle it." But it was as she walked past her family's wagon that Josephine first sensed something was wrong. The air had grown unusually still. The birds that had been singing in the brush had fallen silent. She paused, listening, as a prickling sensation crawled up her spine. Then she heard it, the faint thunder of approaching horses. Many horses. Before she could call out a warning, Thomas stiffened beside her, his experienced ears recognizing the sound instantly. "Raiders!" he shouted, his voice cutting through the festive atmosphere. "Everyone to defensive positions!" Chaos erupted across the camp. Men scrambled for rifles, women gathered children, and the wagon circle that had been opened for the celebration was suddenly a vulnerability rather than a convenience. Henry McKinley rushed toward his daughter, his face pale. "Josie, hide in the wagon now!" "But William," she began, searching the frantic crowd for her fiancé. "There's no time!" Her father pushed her toward their wagon, where the supplies were being rearranged. "Get inside. Stay quiet." Inside the wagon, Josephine found herself alone among the family's possessions. Through the canvas covering, she could hear the thunder of hooves growing louder, the shouts more panicked. Gunshots cracked the air, first a few, then many. Women screamed. Children cried. Her hands trembling, Josephine looked desperately for a hiding place. The wagon floor was packed with trunks and supplies, offering nowhere to conceal herself. Then her eyes fell on a row of flour barrels that had been loosened but not yet removed. The largest barrel, half empty from the journey's cooking, might just be big enough. With shaking hands, she removed the lid and stared at the white powder inside. The sounds of battle intensified outside, men shouting, horses whinnying, the horrifying crack of axe on wood as raiders began breaking into wagons. Josephine hitched up her wedding dress and climbed into the barrel, sinking into the flour until it covered her completely. She pulled the lid back into place above her head, leaving only the smallest crack for air. The world outside became muffled, distant. The flour pressed against her face, forcing her to breathe shallowly to avoid inhaling it. The sweet, dusty smell filled her nostrils as she tried to control her panicked breathing. Through the wooden slats, she heard her wagon's canvas being slashed open. Heavy boots thumped on the floorboards above her head. Men's voices, speaking a language she didn't recognize, barked commands as trunks were overturned and supplies scattered. A boot struck the barrel she was hiding in, rocking it slightly. Josephine froze, not daring to breathe, her heart hammering. So loudly she was certain they would hear it. Something liquid splashed nearby, followed by the acrid smell of coal oil. Then a whoosh as flames caught. They were burning the wagons. Tears streamed silently down Josephine's face, cutting tracks. Through the flour that dusted her skin, the heat intensified. Smoke seeped through the barrel staves. Still, she remained motionless, even as her lungs burned and her muscles cramped. The sounds of violence continued for what seemed like hours, but might have been only minutes. Gradually, the raiders' voices grew more distant. The gunshots became sporadic, then stopped entirely. Eventually, only the crackle of flames and occasional crash of collapsing wagon frames remained, and beneath it all, a terrible silence where human voices should have been. As smoke filled the barrel, Josephine knew she couldn't stay hidden any longer. With trembling hands, she pushed at the lid. It didn't budge. The weight of something heavy had fallen across it during the raid. Panic surged through her as she pushed harder, using her back and shoulders to force the lid upward. Finally, with a splintering crack, it gave way. Smoke immediately rushed in, choking her. She clambered out, gasping, flour billowing around her like a ghostly shroud. The wagon was engulfed in flames, the heat blistering her skin. She tumbled over the side, landing hard on the ground below, and scrambled away from the burning vehicle. What greeted her eyes would haunt her dreams for years to come. The entire wagon train was ablaze, black smoke twisting skyward in thick columns. Bodies lay scattered across the campsite, men, women, and children. Some had been shot, others struck down with axes or knives. Blood darkened the prairie grass. "Mother!" Josephine cried out, stumbling forward on trembling legs. "Father!" She found them near what had been the center of camp, where the wedding was to take place. They lay side by side, as if even in death they had sought each other's comfort. Her father's hunting rifle was empty beside him. He had died defending his wife. "William," she whispered, searching the bodies with increasing desperation. She found her fiancé near the perimeter, a rifle still clutched in his hands, his body surrounded by spent cartridges. He had fought bravely. Josephine sank to her knees. Beside him, her white dress now grey with flour and black with soot. The tears carved clean tracks down her ash-covered face. She was alone. Everyone she knew, everyone she loved, was gone. As shock gave way to the instinct for survival, Josephine forced herself to think practically. The raiders might return. She needed water, food, any supplies she could salvage. Moving mechanically, she searched the burning wreckage, pulling blankets, canteens, and a small sack of cornmeal from the less damaged wagons. Night fell, bringing with it a bone-deep cold that contrasted cruelly with the heat of the still smouldering wagons. Josephine, huddled beneath a salvaged blanket, too numb to properly feel the cold or the hunger that gnawed at her stomach. She couldn't bring herself to leave the site, to abandon her family, William, and the life she had lost in a single, violent afternoon. As dawn broke the following morning, she heard the distant jingling of harness bells. Terror shot through her. Had the raiders returned? She scrambled for a hiding place, then stopped. These bells had a different rhythm, a methodical sound, unlike the chaotic approach of the war party. Over the rise came 3 large covered wagons, each painted with bright colors and pulled by teams of mules rather than oxen. The lead wagon bore an ornate wooden sign, "Donovan and Sons Dry Goods and Sundries." Merchants, traveling traders who moved between frontier settlements selling necessities and small luxuries. A grey-haired man with a full beard sat at the reins of the first wagon. As they crested the hill and the destruction came into full view, he pulled his team to an abrupt halt, his mouth dropping open in shock. "Sweet, merciful heaven!" he breathed, then turned to shout to the wagons behind him. "Charlie! Margaret! Stay alert! We've found trouble!" From the second wagon emerged a woman in her 40s, her red hair streaked with silver, a rifle held competently in her hands. A young man about 20 leapt down from the third wagon, similarly armed. "Pawnee raid, by the looks of it," the older man said grimly as he climbed down from his seat, "though they don't usually attack a group this size." It was then that he spotted Josephine, standing frozen beside the remains of a wagon, covered in flour and soot, her wedding dress in tatters. "There's a survivor," he called to his companions. "A girl." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Patrick Donovan approached the young woman cautiously, hands raised to show he meant no harm. 30 years of frontier trading had taught him to move slowly around those who'd experienced trauma. Behind him, his wife Margaret and son Charlie kept watch, scanning the surrounding hills for any sign of the raiders' return. "I'm Patrick Donovan," he said gently. "This is my family. We're merchants. You're safe now." Josephine stared at him, her eyes vacant with shock. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. "Josephine McKinley. I was to be married yesterday." Margaret Donovan moved forward then, passing her rifle to Charlie before approaching the girl. With motherly intuition, she wrapped a blanket around Josephine's shoulders and guided her toward their lead wagon. "Charlie, check for other survivors," Patrick instructed his son. "I'll help with the—" He glanced at the bodies strewn across the campsite. "With the burying." For the next several hours, the Donovans worked tirelessly. Charlie confirmed what Josephine already knew. There were no other survivors. Patrick and Charlie dug graves, while Margaret tended to Josephine, washing the flour and soot from her skin and hair, giving her clean clothes from their trading stock, and coaxing her to drink broth from their cooking pot. By sunset, the Donovans had buried all 26 victims, marking each grave with crude wooden crosses. Patrick said simple words over the makeshift cemetery as Josephine stood silent, her body present, but her mind still trapped in the horror of the previous day. "Miss McKinley," Patrick said as they finished, "we're headed to Fort Kearney. It's about 4 days' journey. You'll be safe there. They can arrange passage back east for you." Josephine stared at the freshly turned earth covering her parents and fiancé. The thought of returning east seemed impossible. There was nothing for her there. Her parents had sold everything to finance this journey. No home remained, no family awaited. "I have nowhere to go," she whispered. The Donovans exchanged glances. They had raised 3 sons. Charlie was the youngest and had lost a daughter to fever years before. Margaret's eyes conveyed a wordless plea to her husband. "You could travel with us until you decide," Patrick offered. "We trade along the frontier. It's a hard life, but an honest one." That night, huddled in the Donovan's wagon, Josephine slept fitfully, nightmares jolting her awake every hour. Each time, she found Margaret sitting nearby, her presence a silent comfort in the darkness. Dawn brought the difficult decision to leave the burial site behind. As the merchant wagons pulled away, Josephine watched the small cluster of crosses recede into the distance, her old life disappearing with them. The Donovans' caravan moved at a different pace than the emigrant train had. Where the settlers had been focused on covering distance, the merchants followed a winding route between isolated homesteads, military outposts, and native settlements where trading was permitted. Each stop revealed a different facet of frontier life to Josephine. At a lonely ranch, she watched Margaret barter fabric and buttons for fresh eggs and butter. At a military outpost, Patrick negotiated the sale of tobacco and writing paper while collecting news of trail conditions ahead. At a Pawnee camp, the first peaceful encounter Josephine had with natives, Charlie traded glass beads and metal tools for beautifully tanned hides. "Not all Pawnee are raiders," Margaret explained quietly, noting Josephine's tension. "These are peaceful bands. The warriors who attacked your train were likely renegades, men rejected by their own people for violating tribal laws." Josephine nodded, though the distinction provided little comfort. Still, she observed the trading with interest, noting how Patrick used different approaches with different customers, formal and direct with the military officers, patient and story-filled with the settlers, respectful and unhurried with the tribal elders. On the fourth night, as they camped near a small creek, Patrick invited Josephine to join the family for their evening meal planning. "Tomorrow we reach Fort Kearney," he said. "You'll need to decide if you want the army to arrange your return east." Josephine stared into the campfire. The thought of heading back to a place with no connections, no purpose, felt hollow. During these 4 days, despite her grief, she had found the merchant's life strangely compelling. The constant movement, the varied encounters, the self-sufficient nature of their existence. "What if," she began hesitantly, "what if I continued with you? Not forever, but until I find my place." Charlie looked up in surprise, but both Patrick and Margaret smiled, as if they'd been expecting this request. "We could use the help," Margaret admitted, "and I wouldn't mind female company after all these years, with just men." "It won't be easy," Patrick warned. "Trading requires skill, judgment, and the ability to read people quickly. You'll need to learn our inventory, our pricing, our routes." "I can learn," Josephine insisted, a spark of determination breaking through her grief for the first time. "My father was a banker. He taught me figures and accounts." And so, when they reached Fort Kearney the next day, instead of arranging passage east, Josephine helped Margaret select new inventory, while Patrick registered their trading license. The fort commander raised his eyebrows when he heard Josephine's story, but frontier pragmatism prevailed. If the girl chose to travel with the merchants, it was her decision to make. The following weeks transformed Josephine's understanding of the frontier, where the emigrant train had moved through the landscape like an invading force, altering it, conquering it. The Donovans moved with it, adapting to its rhythms and challenges. Patrick proved to be a patient teacher. "Trading isn't just about goods," he explained as they journeyed west. "It's about understanding what people need most, what they value beyond mere survival." He taught her to gauge the quality of furs by touch, to test the purity of gold dust with nitric acid, to recognize the subtle signs of a customer trying to hide their desperation or their eagerness. Margaret's lessons were equally valuable. She showed Josephine how to maintain their careful inventory system, marking each item with coded symbols indicating its cost and minimum acceptable price. She taught her which luxuries were worth their weight and space, fine needles, good scissors, certain medicines, and which were not. "Women often make the real decisions about trades," Margaret confided. "They know what their families truly need, even when the men think they're in charge of the bargaining." Charlie, initially awkward around the young woman who had so suddenly joined their family, gradually warmed to her presence. He taught her practical skills, how to repair wagon wheels, treat the mules properly, and set up camp efficiently. 2 months into her new life, Josephine participated in her first independent trade. They had stopped at a remote farmstead, where a family of 5 struggled to establish a homestead. The father approached their wagon with a bundle of pelts to trade for supplies. Patrick nodded to Josephine. "This one's yours." Drawing a deep breath, she stepped forward to inspect the pelts while assessing the family's situation. She noted the mother's worn dress, the children's 2 small shoes, the carefully mended tools. These people needed practical necessities, more than luxury items. The farmer named his request coffee, sugar, and ammunition, standard items, fairly matched to the value of his pelts. But Josephine had noticed something else, a hand-sewn book in the oldest child's hands, pages clearly, made from precious paper scraps. "The pelts are good quality," she said. "Worth what you're asking, plus..." She reached into the wagon and withdrew a bundle of paper and 2 pencils. "These as well." The man's weathered face registered surprise, then gratitude. Behind him, his child's eyes widened with joy. Later, Patrick nodded approvingly. "You saw what they needed beyond what they asked for. That's the heart of good trading." That night, as she helped Margaret prepare their simple supper, Josephine realized something had shifted within her. The crushing weight of grief remained, but alongside it had grown something new. A sense of purpose, of belonging. The Donovans weren't replacing the family she had lost. Nothing could do that, but they were offering her something she hadn't expected to find again so soon. A path forward, a way to exist in this harsh world that had taken everything from her. As summer faded into autumn, their trading route turned southward, away from the approaching winter storms of the northern plains. The wagons now followed the Santa Fe Trail, where new challenges and opportunities awaited, and where Josephine would soon discover that her journey was just beginning. The Santa Fe Trail presented dangers unlike those of the northern routes. Here the threat came not just from hostile bands, but from the harsh landscape itself. Stretches of baking desert, waterholes separated by punishing distances, and sudden, violent storms that could transform dry creek beds into raging torrents within minutes. "Water is life out here," Patrick cautioned as they filled every available container at the last reliable spring before a 3-day stretch of dry terrain. "And in trading terms, it's more valuable than gold when you're the only one who has it." By November 1857, 6 months after joining the Donovans, Josephine had developed a new awareness of herself and her surroundings. Her city-bred sensitivity to discomfort had been replaced by frontier pragmatism. She could now drive a team of mules through difficult terrain, repair damaged wagon equipment, and conduct trades in Patrick's absence. Her transformation wasn't just practical. The soft-spoken banker's daughter had developed a quiet confidence, born of survival. Though still occasionally haunted by nightmares of the massacre, she found purpose in her new life that helped push those memories further into the background. The Donovans now treated her as family rather than a rescued survivor. She shared their meals, their work, their plans, and their profits. Margaret had begun introducing her as our Josie when they encountered other travelers. As they approached the adobe-walled trading post of Bent's Fort, Patrick called a family council around the evening campfire. "Winter's coming early this year," he said, studying the sky where geese flew south in unusually large numbers. "We've got a choice to make. We can winter at Bent's Fort, which is safe but expensive, or we can make one more run south to Santa. You fee before the mountain passes close. Santa Fe would mean better profits," Charlie noted. "The Spanish settlements pay premium prices for American goods." "But the risk is greater," Margaret countered. "The Jicarilla Apache have been restless this season, and a snowstorm in the passes could trap us for months." Patrick turned to Josephine. You've earned a vote in this decision. What do you think? Josephine considered carefully. Over the past months, she'd learned to evaluate risks against potential rewards, a calculation that balanced survival against prosperity. She'd also learned to read the subtle signs of the natural world that frontier people relied upon. The mules are growing thicker coats than usual, she observed, and the squirrels we've seen have been gathering extra aggressively. I think the winter will be harsh and come early. She paused, but I also noticed our medicine inventory is running low, particularly quinine and laudanum. If we winter at the fort, sickness could spread. Those supplies would be valuable for trading and for our own use. Patrick nodded approvingly at her reasoning. Split the difference then. A fast run to Santa Fe, 2 weeks down, 2 weeks back, with only essential trade goods to lighten the wagons. We'll aim to be back at Bent's Fort before the first major snow. The decision made, they reorganized their wagons the next morning. Non-essential items were stored at Bent's Fort for retrieval in spring. They kept only their most valuable and compact trade goods, medicines, fine tools, sewing supplies, and luxury items like coffee, sugar, and tobacco, things that would command the highest prices in Santa Fe. Traveling light, with just 2 wagons. Instead of 3, they made good time southward. Josephine now drove the second wagon herself, with Charlie riding scout ahead on horseback. The terrain grew increasingly rugged as they approached the mountain passes that separated the plains from the Rio Grande Valley. On the 4th day out from Bent's Fort, Charlie galloped back to the wagons, his expression grim. Riders approaching. From the south, he reported. Not Apache white men, but rough-looking. 6 of them, well-armed. Patrick frowned. Could be trappers or prospectors. Could be bandits. Either way, we'll meet them openly but carefully. He reached beneath his seat and handed Josephine a small pistol. Keep this hidden in your skirts, just in case. The weight of the weapon felt strange in Josephine's hands. She had learned to shoot a rifle for hunting, but had never carried a firearm for protection against other humans. She tucked it into a pocket sewn into her dress, hoping it would remain unused. The approaching riders appeared over a rise in the trail, unshaven men with hard eyes and mismatched clothing that had seen better days. Their leader, a tall man, with a jagged scar across his cheek, raised a hand in greeting as they neared the wagons. "Ho there, traders," he called. "Fine day for traveling, ain't it?" "Fair enough," Patrick replied neutrally, keeping his hands visible on the reins. "You fellows heading north?" "That we are," the scarred man answered, his gaze shifting from Patrick to the wagons, clearly assessing their contents and defenses. "Been prospecting down Santa Fe way. Found enough color to justify a winter of comfort." His eyes settled on Josephine with uncomfortable intensity. "Don't often see women folk on this stretch. Your daughter?" Before Patrick could answer, Josephine spoke up, instinctively creating a narrative that might offer protection. "His niece," she said, forcing a smile, "recently widowed. My uncle and aunt were kind enough to take me in after my husband was killed at Fort Union." The lie served multiple purposes. It explained her presence while suggesting she had connections to the military at nearby Fort Union, and it established her as firmly under the protection of the Donovan family. The scarred man's eyes narrowed, slightly. "Sorry for your loss, ma'am." Though his words expressed sympathy, his tones suggested disappointment at the complications she had introduced. "You boys are welcome to make camp with us tonight," Patrick offered, his voice friendly but his eyes watchful. "Always safer to have more guns when night falls." It was a calculated move. Refusing to share a campsite might signal fear or suspicion, potentially triggering the very confrontation they hoped to avoid. Offering hospitality placed the strangers under temporary obligation and allowed the Donovans to keep watch over them. "Much obliged," the leader replied after a moment's consideration. "Been living on stringy jackrabbit for a week. Wouldn't mind sharing a proper meal." That evening unfolded as a careful dance of frontier etiquette. The strangers contributed some game to the communal stew pot, establishing themselves as fair trading partners rather than moochers. Patrick shared coffee from their precious stores, a gesture of goodwill that acknowledged the men as equals rather than threats. Conversation remained superficial, but revealed much to Josephine's now experienced ear. The men's knowledge of mining seemed genuine enough, but their familiarity with the movements of freight wagons and military patrols suggested they supplemented their prospecting with less legitimate activities. Charlie sat with his rifle across his knees, ostensibly cleaning it but never quite completing the task. Margaret arranged their sleeping quarters so that Josephine would be positioned between her and Patrick, furthest from the visitors' bedrolls. When the strangers finally retired to their side of the camp, Patrick took first watch, sitting with his back to the wagon wheel, shotgun resting across his lap. Josephine lay awake inside the wagon, the small pistol close at hand, listening to the night sounds and the occasional murmur of conversation from the men's camp. "They'll try something before dawn," she whispered to Margaret. "The scarred one. Haggerty kept asking about our route and timing." Margaret nodded in the darkness. "Patrick thinks so too, but they don't know we're expecting it." Shortly after midnight, as the fire burned low and Charlie had taken over the watch from his father, Josephine heard the soft scrape of boot leather on stone. Peering through a small tear in the wagon canvas, she saw 3 shadowy figures moving toward their supply wagon, while another approached Charlie from behind. She reached for the pistol, ready to cry out a warning, when a sharp whistle cut through the night, Patrick's signal. Instantly, lanterns flared from hidden positions around the camp. Patrick emerged from behind a boulder, shotgun leveled, while Margaret rose from her hiding place near the supply wagon, rifle aimed steadily. "That's far enough, gentlemen." Patrick's voice was calm, but carried unmistakable authority. "I'd suggest you return to your bedrolls. Morning comes early on the trail." Caught in the act but not yet committed to violence, the would-be thieves found themselves outmaneuvered. After a tense moment, they backed away, returning to their camp with muttered excuses about just stretching our legs. The remainder of the night passed in rotating watches, with no one in the Donovan camp sleeping deeply. When dawn broke, the strangers made a show of casual departure, their leader tipping his hat to Josephine with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Safe travels, Mom. Hope you find comfort after your loss." As the riders disappeared over the ridge, Patrick turned to Josephine with newfound respect. "Quick thinking with that widow story likely saved us from a more direct confrontation." Josephine realized something had shifted in their relationship. For the first time, she had contributed not just labor or trading skills, but strategic thinking that had protected the family. She was no longer just someone they had rescued. She had become a true partner in their enterprise. "They might circle back," Charlie warned, scanning the horizon. "Try to follow us at a distance. Then we'll take the High Canyon route," Patrick decided. "More difficult for the wagons, but they won't expect it, and it's too narrow for an ambush." As they hitched the mules and prepared to move out, Josephine felt a strange sense of clarity. The constant movement, the ever-present danger, the need for vigilance, these things that would have terrified the young bride she once was, now formed the familiar texture of her daily life. She had survived not just the massacre that had taken her family, but the even greater challenge of building something new from the ashes of her former existence. Each day on the trail took her further from the girl in the flour barrel and closer to the woman she was becoming, resourceful, resilient, and increasingly at home in this unforgiving frontier. The High Canyon route proved challenging but effective. The narrow passage forced them to unload and reload the wagons at several points, the mules straining against steep inclines that no pursuing horseman could navigate easily. By the 3rd day, they were confident they had lost any unwanted followers. Santa Fe emerged on the horizon after 12 days of hard travel, a sprawling settlement of adobe buildings surrounding a central plaza, with the imposing palace of the governors standing as testament to Spanish influence in this remote territory. For Josephine, who had never ventured this far south, the town represented an entirely new world, with its blend of Mexican, native, and American cultures. "We'll need to approach trading differently here," Patrick explained as they prepared to enter the town. "The customs are more formal, and relationships matter more than immediate profit. We don't just sell goods, we establish connections that will serve us for years." Margaret helped Josephine change into a clean dress, one of the few feminine luxuries they maintained on the trail. "First impressions matter in Santa Fe," she advised, brushing Josephine's hair. "These merchants deal with traders from Missouri to California. They can spot desperation or inexperience instantly." As they drove their wagons into town, Josephine observed how Patrick carried himself with a different demeanor here, more dignified, less folksy than his approach with homesteaders or military outposts. He spoke a passable Spanish, greeting the town officials who approached to inspect their goods and collect the customary trading taxes. Senor Donovan, a well-dressed merchant, called out as they established their trading post in a corner of the plaza. "It has been too long. I feared the winter would keep you away this year." "Senor Ortega," Patrick replied warmly, embracing the man. "Nothing short of a blizzard would prevent me from bringing you the finest goods from the States." Josephine watched this theater of commerce with fascination. The actual haggling would come later, she knew, but these preliminary courtesies were essential to establishing the framework within which business would occur. Their first day in Santa Fe proved remarkably successful. The medicines they had prioritized commanded excellent prices, particularly quinine, which was in short supply due to disruptions in shipping from the east. By evening, they had earned enough to justify the risk of the journey tenfold. As they closed up their makeshift stall, a distinguished-looking man in his 60s approached. His clothing marked him as wealthy, though not ostentatious, and the deference shown by passers-by indicated significant local influence. "Mr. Donovan," he said in perfect English, "I am Eduardo Montoya. Perhaps you remember me from your visit 2 years ago. I purchased some surgical instruments for my son's medical practice." Patrick nodded respectfully. "Of course, Don Eduardo. How is Dr. Montoya's practice faring?" "Quite well, thanks to those instruments. In fact, I've come because word has reached me that you have medical supplies. My son has need of specific items, particularly laudanum and surgical silk, if you have them." The conversation shifted to business, with Montoya explaining that his son served not only the wealthy families of Santa Fe, but also several outlying villages where various fevers had recently taken hold. The need was genuine and urgent. Patrick glanced at Josephine. "My niece manages our medical inventory now. She can tell you what we have available." It was a test, Josephine realized, an opportunity to demonstrate her knowledge and negotiate with a high-status client. Drawing on the confidence she had built over the past months, she stepped forward. "We do have both items, Don Eduardo," she confirmed. "The laudanum is of the highest quality, from Baltimore pharmacists, properly sealed and potent. The surgical silk is Japanese, finer than anything produced in Europe." Montoya raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by her expertise. "And the quantities?" 4 4-ounce bottles of laudanum and 3 spools of the silk. "We also have a small supply of quinine powder and some specialized surgical needles that might interest your son." The negotiation that followed was intricate. Montoya was no easy mark. He knew the value of what he sought and bargained skillfully, but Josephine had absorbed Patrick's lessons well. She remained firm on the prices of the rarest items while offering flexibility on the others, creating a package that satisfied both parties. When the deal was concluded, Montoya extended an unexpected invitation. "My wife hosts a small gathering tomorrow evening. Nothing elaborate, just a few friends and some music. We would be honored if you would join us. Traders often bring news and stories that are as valuable as their goods. After he departed, Patrick clapped Josephine on the shoulder with undisguised pride. Brilliantly handled, and an invitation to the Montoya home. That's access to the highest circle in Santa Fe society. Their connections extend to California and Mexico City. That night, as they counted their earnings in the room they'd rented at a local inn, Margaret helped Josephine understand the significance of what had transpired. Men like Montoya don't just buy goods, she explained. They invest in relationships. If you've impressed him, it opens doors throughout the Southwest Territories. The gathering at the Montoya Hacienda the following evening was Josephine's first experience of frontier high society. The adobe mansion sat on a hill overlooking Santa Fe, its interior a surprising blend of Spanish luxury and frontier practicality. Imported carpets covered packed earth floors, fine silver candelabras illuminated hand-hewn ceiling beams. Elena Montoya, Eduardo's wife, greeted them warmly. Unlike many wealthy frontier women who attempted to recreate Eastern fashion in inappropriate settings, she dressed in locally appropriate style, though her jewelry, particularly a striking turquoise and silver necklace, hinted at substantial wealth. "So you are the young woman who impressed my husband," she said, taking Josephine's hands. "He said you knew more about medicine than most doctors he's met." "I've had good teachers," Josephine replied modestly, "and necessity is a quick instructor on the frontier." The evening progressed pleasantly, with local musicians playing traditional Spanish melodies, while servants circulated with trays of food unfamiliar to Josephine: spiced meat wrapped in corn husks, bean pastes with fiery peppers, sweet pastries drizzled with honey. As she conversed with the other guests, a mix of wealthy Hispanic families, American military officers, and successful merchants, Josephine realized how much she had changed. 6 months earlier, she would have been overwhelmed by such company. Now she moved among them with ease, discussing trade routes, weather patterns, and frontier politics with the confidence of experience. Dr. Rafael Montoya, Eduardo's son, sought her out specifically. A serious young man in his 30s, educated in Spain but committed to frontier medicine, he was eager to discuss the medical supplies she had sold his father. "The quality is exceptional," he acknowledged, "but more valuable is your knowledge of what works in field conditions. Books teach procedures for well-equipped hospitals, not for isolated villages during outbreaks." Their conversation shifted to practical medicine, treatments that could be administered with limited supplies, alternative remedies when standard medicines weren't available, methods for stretching scarce resources during epidemics. Josephine shared what she had learned from Margaret and from their encounters with various frontier healers. Raphael contributed formal medical knowledge and experience from Spanish hospitals. "You have a natural understanding of healing," he observed. "Have you considered formal study? There are now schools in the East that accept women, though they remain rare." The question caught Josephine off guard. The possibility of any formal education, let alone medical training, had never entered her calculations since the massacre. Her horizon had narrowed to immediate survival, then expanded only to encompass the trading life. "I haven't," she admitted. "My path took an unexpected turn." As the evening drew to a close, Elena Montoya approached Josephine with a small package. "A token of appreciation for your assistance with our medical supplies," she said, pressing it into Josephine's hands. Back at the inn, Josephine unwrapped the gift, a small silver brooch set with turquoise, similar in style to Elena's necklace, but more modest. "That's Navajo silverwork," Margaret identified it. "Very fine quality. The Montoyas have clearly marked you as someone of consequence." The next morning, as they prepared for another day of trading, a messenger arrived from Dr. Montoya. "A fever. had broken out in a village 20 miles south, and he was departing immediately. Would they consider selling their remaining medical supplies at a discount for this emergency? The request presented a business dilemma. Their remaining medicines could command premium prices in Santa Fe's marketplace, but the emergency was genuine. Patrick called another family council to discuss the matter. "What do you think, Josephine?" he asked. "You handled the original negotiation. This decision should be yours as well." Josephine considered the options, weighing profit against need, immediate gain against long-term relationships. The trader she had become calculated the various factors with practiced efficiency. "We'll sell everything at cost," she decided, "not as charity, but as investment in our standing with the Montoyas, and by extension with all of Santa Fe. The goodwill generated will be worth more than the immediate profit we'd forfeit." Patrick nodded approvingly. The mark of a true trader isn't just knowing when to profit, but when to invest in something less tangible than goods. You've learned well. As they loaded the medical supplies for Dr. Montoya's messenger, Josephine reflected on the strange path that had led her to this moment. From hiding in a flour barrel, watching her future burn around her, she had risen to making decisions that affected not just her survival, but the welfare of entire communities. The young bride she had been would never have recognized the woman she was becoming, a frontier trader whose judgment was respected, whose skills were valued, and whose future now stretched before her with possibilities she had never imagined. Their final week in Santa Fe proved even more profitable than anticipated. Word of their generosity with the medical supplies spread quickly, enhancing their reputation among the local merchants. Doors that might have remained closed to ordinary traders opened for the Donovans, allowing them access to premium goods rarely available to frontier merchants. Spanish leather, fine Mexican silver, and hand-woven textiles from indigenous artisans. "Reputation is currency out here," Patrick explained, as they carefully packed their newly acquired inventory. "What we lost in immediate profit, we've gained tenfold in opportunities." The weather held clear but grew increasingly cold, reminding them that their return journey needed to begin soon. On their final evening, Dr. Montoya returned from the village where he had been treating the fever outbreak, bringing news that the epidemic had been contained, largely thanks to the medicines they had provided. "I've come with a proposal," he said, joining them for dinner at the inn. "My father has extensive business connections throughout the territory. He suggests a more formal arrangement, exclusive trading rights with our family in exchange for guaranteed purchases and protection on your travels through areas where we have influence. Such an arrangement would provide security and predictable income, valuable commodities on the uncertain frontier. Yet it would also limit their independence and ability to trade freely with others. We'd need to discuss this as a family," Patrick replied diplomatically. "It's a significant decision that affects all of us." Later that night, around the small fireplace in their rented room, the family council convened. Charlie, always practical, pointed out the benefits of the Montoya's protection on their increasingly dangerous trade routes. Margaret appreciated the stability such an arrangement would provide as they grew older. Patrick weighed the restrictions against the security. When they turned to Josephine for her perspective, she surprised even herself with her response. "The Montoyas represent everything we need in the short term," she acknowledged. "But I think their offer reveals something more valuable, proof that we've outgrown our current pattern. Instead of traveling ever longer distances for diminishing returns, perhaps we should consider establishing a permanent trading post of our own." She unfolded a map of the territory, pointing to a location she had been studying. Echo Canyon sits at the junction of three major trails, the Santa Fe, the Old Spanish, and the Cherokee. Travelers from all directions pass through, but there's no established trading post for 50 miles in any direction. Patrick studied the location with growing interest. It's a natural choke point. Anyone traveling between the southern territories and the northern routes would pass through. The military has been discussing a new outpost in that region, Charlie added. I overheard officers talking about it in the plaza yesterday. It would mean giving up the traveling life, Margaret noted, her tone revealing mixed emotions about such a change. Building something permanent after all these years on the move, Josephine understood their hesitation. The Donovans had been traveling merchants for over 20 years. It defined their identity as much as their livelihood. Yet she also recognized the toll that constant movement took on them, particularly Patrick and Margaret, who were no longer young. We wouldn't be giving up trading, she pointed out. Just changing how we do it. Instead of bringing goods to scattered customers, they would come to us. We could stock more inventory, offer better selection, even provide services like blacksmithing or harness repair that are impossible when constantly moving. The discussion continued late into the night, with each family member gradually warming to the possibilities. By dawn, a tentative decision had formed. They would use their Santa Fe profits to establish a small trading post at Echo Canyon, while maintaining enough mobility to adjust if the location proved less ideal than anticipated. Their return journey began the following morning, their wagons now laden with trading goods acquired in Santa Fe rather than those brought from the east. The Montoyas, though disappointed by their rejection of the exclusive arrangement, provided letters of introduction to influential families along their route and detailed information about trail conditions ahead. The weather held cooperative through the mountain passes, though nighttime temperatures dropped well below freezing. They traveled steadily, stopping only to trade at scattered settlements where their newly acquired Spanish and native goods commanded premium prices from frontier residents eager for such rarities. As they approached Echo Canyon 2 weeks later, Josephine felt a growing sense of anticipation. She had championed this location based on maps and second-hand accounts. Now she would see if reality matched her vision. The canyon opened before them on a clear December afternoon, a natural corridor, cutting through towering sandstone cliffs with a year-round spring, creating a small oasis of cottonwood trees and hardy grasses. At its widest point, the canyon formed a natural bowl approximately 5 acres in size, protected from harsh winds by the surrounding rock walls. "It's perfect," Charlie breathed, surveying the defensible position and natural resources. Water, grazing, shelter, everything essential in one location. They made camp that night at the spring, discussing plans for their trading post with growing excitement. Patrick sketched a rough layout in the dirt, a main building for trading and living, quarters, a separate stable for animals, perhaps a small smithy if they could find a blacksmith willing to join their enterprise. "We'll need to file a formal claim," he noted. "The nearest land office is in Taos, about 4 days' journey from here. Charlie and I should go as soon as possible, before someone else recognizes the value of this location." The following week passed in a flurry of activity. Margaret and Josephine established a temporary camp, while Patrick and Charlie traveled to Taos to file their claim. They surveyed the land, identifying the optimal building site and planning for expansion. They catalogued their current inventory and created lists of supplies they would need to acquire before winter fully set in. When Patrick and Charlie returned with the precious land certificate, the family celebrated with their last bottle of wine, purchased in Santa Fe for this very purpose. The document made official what Josephine had already begun to feel. This place would be home, the first permanent one she had known since leaving her parents' house in Missouri. "To Echo Trading Post," Patrick toasted, raising his cup, "and to the woman whose vision brought us here." The acknowledgement filled Josephine with quiet pride. From the desperate survivor hidden in a flour barrel to the respected businesswoman, helping shape a family's future, the transformation still amazed her in moments of reflection. As the others retired for the night, She walked alone to the edge of the spring, watching stars reflect in its still surface. The massacre that had claimed her family and fiancé would always remain part of her, a scar that occasionally ached when memories surfaced, but it no longer defined her existence or limited her horizons. Construction began immediately, with all four working from dawn until dusk to establish their trading post before the worst of winter arrived. They built the main structure first, a solid cabin with thick walls of local stone and pine logs harvested from a stand several miles distant. The main room would serve as the trading area, with family quarters partitioned at the rear and storage space in a partial cellar dug beneath the floor. Word of their establishment spread quickly along the trails. Even before the building was completed, travelers began stopping to trade. Trappers heading into the mountains for the winter season, soldiers traveling between outposts, native hunters with pelts and meat to exchange for manufactured goods. By Christmas 1857, 8 months after the massacre that had nearly claimed Josephine's life, Echo Trading Post conducted its first official day of business. The main building, though still rough in places, stood complete. Shelves lined the walls, stocked with their carefully curated inventory. A large stone fireplace provided warmth against the winter chill. A hand-painted sign, crafted by Charlie, hung proudly above the door. Their first customers were a family of settlers whose wagon had broken an axle 10 miles north. They arrived cold and discouraged, amazed to find a trading post where maps showed only wilderness. By day's end, they departed with a repaired wagon, fresh supplies, and renewed determination, exactly the service Josephine had envisioned their post providing. That evening, as they gathered around the fire in their new home, Patrick raised an important question that had remained unaddressed amid the flurry of construction. "Josephine," he said, his tone uncommonly formal, "you've become essential to this family and this business. Your vision brought us here, and your skills have proven invaluable. Margaret and I have discussed this at length, and if you're willing, we'd like to make your position official." Margaret reached into her sewing basket and withdrew a document, a formal partnership agreement that would make Josephine an equal owner in Echo Trading Post and officially change her surname to Donovan. "We can't replace the family you lost," Margaret said gently, "and we wouldn't try to, but you've become a daughter to us in every way that matters. We want to make it legal and binding." Emotion tightened Josephine's throat as she accepted the document. The Donovans had rescued her, taught her, respected her, and now offered her the belonging she had thought forever lost after the massacre. Though she would always honor the memory of her birth family and the future that had been stolen from her on her wedding day, she recognized that life had granted her an unexpected second chance. "I would be honored," she managed finally, her voice steady despite the tears threatening to spill. "I can think of no better family to call my own." As the new year of 1858 dawned over Echo Canyon, Josephine McKinley Donovan stood at the threshold of their trading post, watching the sun illuminate the red canyon walls. The flower-covered bride, who had trembled in a barrel less than a year before, now gazed confidently toward a future she had helped create. A future built on the foundation of tragedy, but reaching toward possibility, security, and a home that was truly her own. Spring arrived early to Echo Canyon in 1858, bringing with it both opportunities and challenges for the fledgling trading post. The winter snows melted rapidly, turning the nearby creek into a rushing torrent and temporarily blocking the northern trail with mudslides. But as the weather warmed, traffic through the canyon increased steadily, validating Josephine's vision of the location's strategic value. By April, the one-year anniversary of the massacre that had altered her life's course, Echo Trading Post had established itself as an essential waypoint for travelers on 3 major routes. Their reputation for fair prices, quality goods, and honest dealings spread along the frontier telegraph of word-of-mouth communication that functioned more efficiently than any government mail service. The anniversary itself passed without formal acknowledgement, though Josephine marked it privately with a small ritual. At dawn, she walked alone to a ridge overlooking the canyon and placed a bouquet of early spring wildflowers on a small cairn of stones she had assembled. No graves existed for her parents or William, her lost fiancé. Their bodies lay in unmarked earth hundreds of miles away, but she needed a physical place to honor their memory. Patrick found her there as the sun cleared the eastern ridge, bathing the canyon in golden light. He approached quietly, respecting her solitude, but offering silent companionship. They stood together watching the trading post below come to life as Margaret and Charlie began the day's preparations. "They would be proud of you," Patrick said, finally understanding without being told what day this was. "Proud of who you've become and what you've built." Josephine nodded, unable to speak past the tightness in her throat. The grief no longer overwhelmed her as it once had, but on this day the memories returned with painful clarity. The wedding dress she never got to wear before a groom, the future so carefully planned and violently destroyed, the terrifying hours in the flour barrel listening to death claim everyone she loved. "I still wonder sometimes," she admitted, "what they would think of this life I've found. It's so different from anything we imagined back in Missouri." Patrick considered this thoughtfully. "In my experience, parents want two things for their children above all else: that they find purpose and that they're surrounded by people who care for them. You've found both." As they walked back down to the trading post, Josephine reflected on the truth of his words. Though fate had brutally redirected her path, she had indeed found both purpose and family. The trading post now employed 2 additional workers, a blacksmith named Gerald Tucker, who had been heading to California until Patrick convinced him that a steady position at Echo Canyon offered better prospects, and a young Shoshone woman named Willow, who served as translator and guide for negotiations with native traders. The post itself had expanded beyond its initial structure. A proper stable now housed their horses and mules, along with those belonging to overnight guests. A separate blacksmith shop allowed Gerald to offer wagon repairs and horseshoeing services that brought in substantial additional income. They had even added 2 small guest cabins, where travelers could find secure lodging for a modest fee. Their inventory had grown equally diverse, carefully curated to meet the needs of the various groups that passed through Echo Canyon. For emigrants heading west, they stocked essential supplies: axles, wagon wheels, preserved foods, ammunition. For soldiers and scouts, they offered reliable weapons, durable clothing, and field equipment. For native traders, they acquired manufactured goods otherwise unavailable in tribal territories: metal tools, cooking pots, woven textiles. As Josephine checked inventory that morning, marking items that needed replenishing before the summer rush, a rider arrived from the south, a military courier wearing the dust of hard travel. "Message for Echo Trading." "Post," he announced, dismounting stiffly. The sealed letter he presented bore an official military stamp and was addressed to Proprietors, Echo Trading Post, Utah Territory. Patrick broke the seal and scanned the contents, his expression growing increasingly thoughtful. "It's from Colonel Jenkins at Fort Bridger," he explained. "The Army is establishing a new outpost 30 miles north of here and seeks a reliable supplier for their basic provisions. They're inviting us to submit a proposal." The opportunity was significant. Military contracts provided steady, reliable income, a counterbalance to the seasonal fluctuations of civilian trade. Yet such contracts also came with strict requirements and potential complications. They'd need consistent supplies on a fixed schedule, Josephine noted, mentally calculating their capacity. "More than we currently stock, and it would tie up capital and inventory reserved for a single customer," Charlie added. limiting our flexibility with other traders. The family council convened that evening after the post closed for the day. Seated around the large table in their private quarters, they debated the military proposal from all angles. "We should consider transportation challenges," Josephine pointed out. 30 miles over rough terrain with loaded wagons every 2 weeks would require additional teams and drivers. Gerald mentioned his brother is looking for work, Patrick recalled. He has experience with freight hauling from his time with the Russell Company. Margaret, ever practical, raised another concern. "If we commit to this contract, one of us would need to oversee the deliveries personally. The Army is particular about their paperwork and procedures." They continued discussing logistics late into the night. By morning, they had crafted a detailed proposal that addressed potential obstacles while protecting their interests. Charlie would ride to Fort Bridger the following day to deliver their bid and negotiate terms if the colonel expressed interest. The military contract was just one of several significant developments that spring. As Echo Trading Post's reputation grew, they began receiving visitors seeking more than simple trade. Goods. A representative from a St. Louis merchant house arrived to discuss bulk purchasing of buffalo hides and beaver pelts. A land speculator offered to buy their claim for 3 times what they had paid, sensing the location's growing value. Even the Montoya family sent an emissary from Santa Fe, renewing their interest in a formal business relationship. Each opportunity required careful evaluation, with Josephine increasingly taking the lead in financial assessments while Patrick handled negotiations and Charlie managed logistical considerations. The trading post was evolving from a simple frontier exchange point into a complex business enterprise with far-reaching connections. In late May, as wildflowers carpeted the canyon floor and the year's first major wagon train passed through, Josephine received an unexpected visitor. Dr. Rafael Montoya arrived unannounced, having detoured from his planned route to examine a patient at a nearby settlement. "Miss Donovan," he greeted her formally, though his warm smile suggested genuine pleasure at seeing her again. "Your trading post has exceeded even my father's expectations. News of your success has reached as far as Santa Fe." Josephine gave him a tour of their expanded operation, pride evident in her descriptions of the improvements they had implemented since establishing the post. Raphael listened attentively, occasionally asking perceptive questions about their business model and future plans. When they reached the small herb garden Margaret had planted behind the main building, his interest sharpened noticeably. He knelt to examine the medicinal plants growing in neat rows, echinacea, yarrow, wild mint, and others native to the region. "You've created a pharmacy as well as a trading post," he observed. "These are precisely the herbs I've found most effective in frontier medicine. Margaret has been teaching me their properties and preparation," Josephine explained. "We've found that offering basic medical supplies and knowledge serves our customers well and builds loyalty." "A wise approach," Raphael agreed, "particularly in this region where the nearest doctor might be days away." As they continued walking, Raphael broached the real purpose of his visit. "I've come with a proposition, Miss Donovan. The territorial governor has established a commission to improve medical care in outlying settlements. We need individuals with both medical knowledge and established connections in remote areas to serve as liaisons, distributing supplies, providing basic training to local healers, and identifying serious cases that require professional attention." Josephine listened with growing interest as he outlined the role. It would require occasional travel to surrounding settlements, but Echo Canyon's central location made it an ideal base of operations. The position offered formal training with visiting physicians, a modest stipend, and official recognition from unterritorial authorities. "You're offering me a position with the medical commission," she clarified, surprised by the unexpected opportunity. I'm offering you a chance to expand your influence beyond trade, Raphael corrected gently. You already serve this region through your trading post. This would allow you to serve it in another, equally valuable capacity. The prospect stirred something in Josephine that she hadn't realized still existed, an ambition beyond the trading post, a desire to contribute in ways that honored her lost family while creating something uniquely her own. Her father had always encouraged her intellectual curiosity, even when it defied conventional expectations for young women. This opportunity seemed to bridge her past with her present in meaningful ways. I would need to discuss this with my family, she said. Our business requires all our attention, particularly with the military contract pending. Of course, Raphael replied. The commission doesn't meet until August in Salt Lake City. You have time to consider. As May turned to June, Echo Trading both secured the military contract, hired Gerald's brother James as their dedicated freight driver, and expanded their inventory to accommodate increased demand. Though these developments kept Josephine fully occupied, Raphael's proposal remained in her thoughts, representing a potential new dimension to her evolving identity on the frontier. The young bride who had hidden in a flour barrel to escape massacre had transformed first into a traveling merchant, then into a respected business partner, and now stood at the threshold of yet another metamorphosis, one that might combine the Donovan family legacy with her own emerging vision for service beyond commerce. On warm evenings, Josephine often stood outside the trading post, watching the sunset paint Echo Canyon's walls with fiery light. In those quiet moments, she could almost hear her father's voice, encouraging her to embrace each new opportunity, her mother's gentle reminder to keep faith in life's possibilities, and William's earnest belief in her capabilities. They would indeed be proud, she thought, not just of what she had survived, but of what she was building, a life woven from tragedy's threads, but creating a pattern entirely her own. The summer of 1858 brought unprecedented activity to Echo Canyon. As tensions between the federal government and Mormon settlers in Utah territory eased following the Utah War, civilian travel through the region increased dramatically. Gold seekers bound for California, Mormon converts heading to Salt Lake, and settlers seeking land in Oregon created a steady stream of customers for the trading post. The military contract proved both challenging and rewarding. Twice monthly, James Tucker drove a loaded wagon to the new outpost, delivering precisely catalogued supplies and returning with payment vouchers that could be redeemed at Fort Bridger. The arrangement required meticulous record-keeping, but provided stable income that allowed the Donovans to expand their inventory beyond immediate necessities to include luxury items that commanded higher profits. Josephine found herself increasingly drawn to the medical aspects of their business. What had begun as a simple stock of basic remedies, quinine for fevers, laudanum for pain, bandages for wounds, had evolved into a comprehensive selection of medicines, surgical supplies, and herbal preparations. Travelers frequently sought her advice on treating trail ailments, and local settlers began making special trips to consult her about more serious conditions. "You've developed quite a reputation," Margaret observed one evening as they restocked shelves after a particularly busy day. "That woman today traveled 3 days just to ask your opinion about her husband's lung complaint." Josephine arranged bottles of tincture in careful rows. "I simply shared what you taught me about Malene tea and cherry bark syrup. It's nothing Dr. Montoya wouldn't have recommended." "But Dr. Montoya isn't here, and you are," Margaret pointed out. "That matters. On the frontier where medical knowledge is scarce and distances are vast." The conversation turned Josephine's thoughts once more to Raphael's proposal. The Territorial Medical Commission would meet in Salt Lake City in just 3 weeks. If she intended to accept the liaison position, she would need to make preparations. Soon, that night, she raised the topic during family dinner. "I've been considering Dr. Montoya's offer," she began, explaining the opportunity in detail for Charlie and James, who hadn't been present during Raphael's visit. Patrick nodded thoughtfully as she finished. "It's an important position. The territory desperately needs organized medical care beyond the few established settlements." "But what about the trading post?" Charlie questioned. "We're busier than ever, especially with the military contract." "That's partly why I've delayed deciding," Josephine acknowledged. "I wouldn't want to leave you short-handed during our busiest season." Margaret reached across the table to cover Josephine's hand with her own. "We managed before you joined us, dear. We can certainly adjust if this is something you want to pursue." The family discussion continued late into the evening, exploring practical considerations rather than questioning the value of the opportunity itself. By the time they retired for the night, a tentative plan had formed. If Josephine accepted the liaison position, they would hire additional help for the trading post. The medical work would likely be most intensive during winter months when trading naturally slowed, creating a complementary seasonal pattern. 2 days later, Josephine sent a letter to Raphael in Santa Fe, confirming her interest in the position and stating her intention to attend the commission meeting in August. The decision felt momentous, her first significant step toward an identity separate from those still connected to the Donovan family business. July brought unexpected visitors to Echo Canyon. A military patrol escorting an Eastern journalist, named Edward Bramwell, stopped at the trading post while documenting frontier conditions for several New York newspapers. Bramwell, a sharp-eyed man in his 40s with the weathered complexion of someone unaccustomed to harsh Western conditions, immediately recognized the unusual nature of the establishment. "A female proprietor," he remarked, observing Josephine's confident management of a complex transaction with native traders. "That's a rarity worth noting in my dispatches." When business quieted that evening, Bramwell requested an interview, explaining that his readers back east were particularly interested in the experiences of women on the frontier. "They've read plenty about men seeking fortunes and adventure," he explained, "but far less about the women who help civilize these territories." Josephine agreed with some reluctance, uncomfortable with the attention, but recognizing the potential business benefits of Eastern publicity. She answered his questions carefully, sharing selected details about the trading post's establishment while avoiding any mention of the massacre that had brought her west. Bramwell's persistent questioning, however, eventually uncovered fragments of her story. "You came west as a bride," he noted, consulting his notebook, "yet now you're Miss Donovan. There's clearly more to your journey than a simple business venture." Josephine hesitated. The memory of the flour barrel, the sounds of death surrounding her, the terror and loss, these were private wounds she rarely discussed, even with the Donovans. Yet something in Bramwell's respectful interest suggested that sharing her experience might serve a greater purpose than satisfying mere curiosity. "Yes," she acknowledged finally. "I was to be married the day our wagon train was attacked. I alone survived, hidden in a flour barrel while my family and fiancé were killed." Bramwell's pen stilled. "My dear young woman, how unimaginably tragic." "It was," she agreed simply. "But what followed? Being found by the Donovans, learning the trading business, establishing this post. That's perhaps the more important story. Not just survival, but finding purpose after loss." The interview shifted then, focusing on her transformation from victim to frontier entrepreneur. Bramwell seemed particularly struck by her forthcoming role with the Territorial Medical Commission. "You've created quite an extraordinary life from tragic beginnings," he observed, as their conversation concluded. Would you permit me to share your full story? It might inspire others facing adversity, particularly young women with limited options in difficult circumstances. Josephine considered his request overnight, discussing it with Patrick and Margaret. There were practical concerns. Publicizing her presence at Echo Canyon might attract unwanted attention from unsavory characters drawn to a business known to be partly managed by a young woman. Yet there was also potential value in reaching others who might find hope in her journey. Tell your story, Patrick advised, but perhaps suggest he change enough details to protect your privacy while preserving the essential truth. The following morning, she provided Bramwell with additional information, but requested that he alter her name and the trading post's exact location in his published account. He agreed readily, recognizing the wisdom of such precautions on the still wild frontier. As Bramwell's military escort prepared to depart, he made a final request. Would you permit a daguerreotype? My readers appreciate being able to envision the subjects of my articles. Photography was still rare on the frontier, and Josephine had never sat for such an image. The idea of having her likeness captured, of creating a visual record that would survive her, held unexpected appeal. She consented, and Bramwell set up his portable equipment in front of the trading post. The resulting image showed a composed young woman of 20, standing beside the hand-painted sign of Echo Trading Post. Her simple dress and practical hairstyle reflected frontier practicality, but her direct gaze into the camera conveyed unmistakable confidence and purpose. "You appear much older than your years," Margaret commented when Bramwell showed them the finished plate. "Not in features, but in presence." "Experience ages one faster than time," Josephine replied, studying her own image with curious detachment. The young bride, who had hidden in the flour barrel, seemed entirely absent from the woman in the photograph. August arrived with scorching heat that baked the canyon walls and dried the creek to a trickle. Travel slowed as wagons avoided the punishing midday temperatures, creating a welcome lull that allowed Josephine to prepare for her journey to Salt Lake City and the medical commission meeting. Patrick insisted on accompanying her, concerned about her traveling alone, despite her protests that she was perfectly capable. "It's not about capability," he explained. "It's about safety in numbers. Besides, I have business with merchants there that's best conducted in person." They departed. On a cool morning in mid-August, traveling in their smallest wagon with James riding outrider as additional protection. The route to Salt Lake City would take them through mountain passes, where isolated travelers sometimes fell prey to bandits or hostile native bands that rejected peace treaties signed by their tribal leaders. On their second day of travel, as they navigated a narrow canyon several hours north of Echo Trading Post, James suddenly signaled for them to halt. He had spotted fresh tracks cutting across their path, unshod ponies moving at speed, accompanied by moccasin prints that suggested a war party rather than peaceful hunters. "Recent," he confirmed, examining the disturbed earth. "No more than an hour ahead of us, moving fast in the same direction we're headed." Patrick considered their options carefully. Continuing might bring them into contact with warriors potentially hostile to white travelers. Turning back would mean abandoning Josephine's commitment to the medical commission. "We'll proceed with caution," he decided finally. But at the first sign of trouble, we turned back immediately. They traveled in tense silence for the next several miles, James scouting ahead while Patrick kept his rifle across his lap. Josephine found herself hyper-aware of every sound. Birds falling silent, branches cracking, the whisper of wind through stone passages that could mask the approach of danger. The canyon widened gradually into a small valley where a stream cut through meadowland. As they rounded a bend, James stopped abruptly, raising his hand in warning. Ahead, smoke rose from what appeared to be a small encampment near the stream. Whether it belonged to the war party they had been tracking remained unclear. Patrick brought the wagon to a halt in the shelter of several large boulders. "Wait here," he instructed Josephine. "James and I will investigate." "No," she countered firmly. "If it's a native encampment, a woman's presence might signal peaceful intentions. Besides, I speak some Shoshone thanks to Willow's teachings." After brief debate, they agreed to approach together, moving slowly, with weapons visible but not aimed, signaling neither aggression nor weakness to whoever waited ahead. As they drew closer, the nature of the encampment became clear. It was not a war party, but a small band of Shoshone families, women, children, and elderly, with only 2 young warriors standing guard. More troubling, several figures lay on blankets near the central fire, clearly ill or injured. "Something's wrong," Josephine murmured. "This isn't a normal traveling camp." When the guards spotted them, they raised their rifles defensively. Josephine stepped forward slightly, making the peace sign Willow had taught her and speaking the few Shoshone phrases she knew. Her efforts, though linguistically imperfect, achieved their purpose. The guards lowered their weapons slightly, allowing the travelers to approach while maintaining cautious vigilance. What they discovered was both tragic and opportunity. Smallpox, that dreaded scourge of native populations, had struck this small band. They had separated from their main tribe to protect others, following traditional practice when contagious disease appeared. 5 had already died. 8 more showed symptoms of varying severity. Josephine's medical knowledge, limited though it was, might mean the difference between life and death for those not yet showing serious symptoms. The journey to Salt Lake City would have to wait. Here was the true test of her commitment to frontier medicine, not in a formal commission meeting, but in a desperate encampment where every hour mattered. Without hesitation, Josephine made her decision. "I need my medicine chest from the wagon," she told Patrick, already moving toward the suffering families, "and clean water as much as we can spare." The next hours passed in a blur of desperate activity. Though Josephine had never treated smallpox, she had studied descriptions of its progression in one of Dr. Montoya's medical texts and recalled Margaret's teachings about supportive care for serious fevers. The disease had already taken hold. In the small band, too late for prevention, but proper nursing might still save those in early stages. Communication presented the first challenge. Her limited Shoshone vocabulary proved inadequate for medical instructions, but among the band was an elderly woman who had lived near a trading post in her youth and spoke broken English. Through this interpreter, Josephine explained what she needed to do. "Tell them I cannot cure the sickness," she instructed honestly, "but I can help ease suffering and perhaps save some who are not yet badly ill." Initial wariness gave way to desperate acceptance as the band's own healing methods had failed to halt the disease's spread. Working methodically, Josephine organized the encampment into 3 sections: those showing no symptoms, those with early signs, and those critically ill. This basic quarantine might help limit new infections. For those already suffering, she provided what comfort medicine could offer: willow bark tea for fever, clean cloths soaked in cool water, calamine for the painful pustules, and careful attention to hydration. She showed the women how to administer these treatments, demonstrating proper techniques for handling contaminated materials to reduce their own risk of infection. Patrick and James proved invaluable partners in the effort. They established a separate camp upwind from the infected area, constructed a proper fire pit for boiling water, and hunted fresh game to provide nourishing broth for the weakened patients. Without complaint, they followed Josephine's increasingly confident directions, recognizing that her growing medical knowledge now surpassed their own limited experience with illness. 3 days stretched into a week as they remained with the Shoshone band. 2 more patients died despite their efforts, an elderly man and a child, barely old enough to walk. The traditional burial rituals involving careful preparation of the bodies presented another challenge. Josephine gently explained through their interpreter the danger of handling the deceased without protection. The sickness remains in their bodies after death, she told the grieving families. Honor them with your prayers and songs, but let us help prepare them for burial in a way that protects you. This violation of sacred practices initially met resistance, but the band's headman, himself weakened by early symptoms, finally gave his approval. Patrick and James wrapped the bodies carefully in blankets soaked in the strongest spirits from their trading supplies, then helped the warriors dig deeper graves than their tradition typically required. By the 10th day, a fragile hope emerged. No new cases had appeared among those previously showing no symptoms. Several patients with early-stage infection began showing signs of recovery. The strict separation protocols Josephine had implemented appeared to be working. The band's healer, an elderly woman who had initially regarded Josephine with suspicion, now watched her techniques with keen interest. Through their interpreter, a halting exchange of medical knowledge began. The Shoshone woman demonstrated herbal preparations that Josephine recognized as effective anti-inflammatories and stomach soothers. In return, Josephine showed her the benefits of clean bandages and proper wound care. "Your medicine and our medicine," the elderly healer remarked through the interpreter, touching her heart. "Together stronger." This unexpected collaboration represented something rare on the frontier, mutual respect across the cultural divide that so often turned to violence. Instead, Josephine documented the healer's preparations in her journal, carefully noting ingredients and methods for future reference. On the 12th day, as recovery seemed increasingly certain for most of the survivors, a party of mounted Shoshone warriors appeared on the ridge above the encampment. They had been tracking the separated band and approached cautiously when they spotted the white traveler's wagon. Patrick and James prepared for possible conflict, but the headman of the recovering band immediately sent a messenger to explain the situation. The warriors listened intently to the account of the white woman healer who had stayed rather than fled from their sickness. Their leader, a tall man with ceremonial feathers tied in his hair, approached Josephine with formal dignity. "My brother's son lives because of you," he said through the interpreter, gesturing to a recovering boy of about 10. "The people remember those who help in dark times." From around his neck, he removed a medicine pouch decorated with intricate beadwork and presented it to her. "This belonged to my grandfather, who was also a healer. It will protect you on your journeys." The gift represented far more than a simple token of appreciation. Among the Shoshone, such medicine pouches carried spiritual significance and were typically passed only through family lines. By presenting it to Josephine, the warrior was symbolically acknowledging her role as a healer, worthy of his tribe's respect. A profound honor rarely granted to outsiders, much less to white women. With the arrival of the warriors, responsibility for the recovering band could now transfer to their own people. Though Josephine provided final instructions for continuing care and left what medical supplies she could spare, it was time to resume their journey to Salt Lake City. The medical commission meeting had undoubtedly concluded in their absence, but Patrick was confident that a letter explaining the circumstances would suffice to maintain Josephine's candidacy for the liaison position. As they broke camp on the 14th day, the entire Shoshone band gathered to bid them farewell. The headman, now able to stand with assistance, proclaimed that Josephine and her companions would forever be welcome in their territory, and that word of their actions would spread to other bands. "The woman saved from death," he named her through the interpreter, "who brings life back to others." The journey to Salt Lake City resumed with a different mood than when they had departed Echo Canyon. Josephine felt transformed by the experience, tested in ways that no commission meeting could have managed, and affirmed in her calling toward medicine. "I'm not certain I need the official position anymore," she confided to Patrick as their wagon rolled through the mountain passes. "The real work happens in places like that encampment, not in government offices." Patrick nodded thoughtfully. "Perhaps, but official recognition brings resources and authority that might help you reach more people in need. The territorial government can provide medicines, equipment, and protection that we cannot offer alone." In Salt Lake City, they found the settlement bustling with activity following resolution of tensions with the federal government. The Mormon leadership had reached accommodation with Washington, allowing the territory to resume normal commerce and governance after months of uncertain relations. At territorial headquarters, Josephine delivered her letter explaining her absence from the commission meeting, along with a detailed report of the smallpox outbreak and the treatments she had implemented. The clerk accepted these documents with interest, promising to forward them to Dr. Montoya and the commission leadership. "Actually," said a familiar voice from behind them, "you can deliver your report in person." Rafael Montoya stepped forward from an adjacent office, his expression warming at the sight of Josephine. "The commission has extended its deliberations due to the political situation. We're meeting again tomorrow." Over dinner at Salt Lake City's finest hotel, a far cry from their recent camp beside the Shoshone encampment, Josephine shared the full account of their experience with the smallpox outbreak. Raphael listened with professional interest, occasionally asking clarifying questions about symptoms and treatment responses. "You did remarkably well with limited resources," he concluded. "Better than many trained physicians might have managed in similar circumstances." "I had excellent teachers," Josephine acknowledged, thinking of Margaret's practical wisdom and the books Raphael himself had provided. "And desperate circumstances have a way of focusing one's abilities." The following day, Josephine presented her experience to the full medical commission, 5 physicians and 3 territorial administrators charged with improving frontier healthcare. Her account of implementing quarantine procedures, adapting available medications, and collaborating with native healers generated considerable discussion among the members. Dr. William Harrison, the commission's chairman, regarded her with undisguised surprise. "Miss Donovan, you've demonstrated more practical medical knowledge and decisiveness than many medical school graduates I've encountered. The liaison position seems almost insufficient for your capabilities." "The position suits my circumstances." "Perfectly," Josephine countered. "I have responsibilities to my family's trading post that prevent formal medical training, but serving as a liaison would allow me to bridge both worlds." After brief deliberation, the commission not only approved her appointment but expanded its scope. Beyond simply distributing supplies and information, she would be authorized to provide basic medical training to isolated settlements and document effective traditional remedies from native populations. They also allocated funds for a small but well-equipped medical chest to supplement her own supplies. "The territory needs more individuals like you," Dr. Harrison told her as he presented her official commission papers. "People with both the knowledge to help and the courage to remain when others would flee." As they prepared to depart Salt Lake City the following day, Josephine felt a profound sense of alignment between her past and future. The devastating loss that had brought her west had led, through unpredictable paths, to a role where she could prevent similar suffering for others. The young bride who had hidden in that flour barrel could never have imagined becoming a frontier healer with official territorial recognition. Yet the journey between those 2 points now seemed almost inevitable in retrospect. "Ready to return home?" Patrick asked as they loaded the last supplies into their wagon. "Home, Echo Canyon Trading Post, the Donovan family, her medical work, all pieces of an identity built from tragedy's ashes?" "Yes, she replied simply. More than ready. 5 years passed, transforming both Echo Canyon Trading Post and the young woman who had helped establish it. By 1863, what had begun as a simple trading operation had evolved into a thriving settlement. A dozen permanent buildings now surrounded the original structure, housing a diverse community drawn by the post's reputation for fair trade, medical services, and strategic location. Josephine Donovan, now 27, had developed into a frontier figure of unique standing. Her dual role as trading post proprietor and territorial medical liaison created an unusual sphere of influence that crossed traditional boundaries of gender, culture, and profession. The frightened bride who had hidden in a flour barrel existed now only in memory and in the occasional nightmares that still visited on stormy nights. On a clear autumn morning, as golden light painted the canyon walls, Josephine stood outside. The medical cabin that had been added to the trading post 3 years earlier. This dedicated space for treating patients represented the physical manifestation of her evolving identity, separate from but connected to the Donovan family business. Inside, she had just finished treating a teamster's broken arm, setting the bone with practiced efficiency while his wagon train waited to continue their journey west. Such emergency treatments had become routine, her skills honed through experience and the occasional training sessions in Salt Lake City with visiting physicians from the east. Patrick joined her, his hair now fully gray but his stride still vigorous, despite his 60 years. "Another satisfied customer?" he asked, watching the teamster rejoin his companions with his arm properly splintered and bound. "He'll heal well if he follows instructions to rest it properly," Josephine replied. "Though, I suspect he'll be driving his team again before they reach the next settlement." They walked together toward the main trading post, where Margaret and Charlie were managing the morning's transactions. The building had been expanded twice to accommodate growing inventory and increasing customer traffic. Where once they had stocked only essential supplies, they now offered everything from basic necessities to carefully selected luxury goods. "The army courier brought something for you," Patrick mentioned, retrieving an official-looking envelope from his pocket, from the territorial governor's office. Josephine accepted the document with curiosity. Her role with the medical commission occasionally brought correspondence from territorial officials, usually requests for reports or notification of supply deliveries. This envelope, however, bore the governor's personal seal rather than the standard administrative marking. Inside was a formal letter acknowledging her 5 years of service to the territory and announcing an unexpected honor. The governor was establishing a frontier medical college in Salt Lake City and wished to appoint her to its advisory board. The institution would train physicians specifically for territorial service, emphasizing practical skills needed in remote settlements. "They want me to help design the curriculum," she explained to Patrick after reading the letter aloud. "Apparently, my reports on frontier medical challenges have proven useful." Patrick's face creased with pride. "They're recognizing what we've known for years, that your experience is worth more than a dozen medical textbooks written by city doctors who've never treated patients outside a proper hospital." The appointment represented more than personal recognition. It signified a shift in territorial governance, an acknowledgement that frontier healthcare required different approaches than those imported unchanged from eastern cities. Josephine's practical innovations, especially her integration of native healing techniques with conventional medicine, had gradually gained acceptance among territorial authorities. As they continued toward the trading post, a rider appeared at the canyon entrance, a military scout moving at speed. The man reined his lathered horse before them, touching his hat in quick greeting. "Miss Donovan? Message from Captain Wilson at Fort Bridger." Outbreak of fever at the Northern Shoshone winter camp. Their chief specifically requested you. Captains offering military escort if you're willing to go. The request wasn't surprising. Since helping the smallpox-stricken band 5 years earlier, Josephine had been called to assist with several native health crises. The Shoshone bands in particular regarded her with special respect, referring to her by the name given by that first headman, "Woman saved from death who brings life back." To others, "How many affected?" she asked, already mentally inventorying her medical supplies. "Over 20 when I left yesterday, children mostly. Captain says it resembles the mountain fever from last spring." Josephine turned to Patrick. "I'll need to leave immediately. Mountain fever progresses quickly." He nodded without hesitation. "I'll have James prepare the medical wagon. Charlie can ride with you for additional protection, even with the military escort." As they organized the necessary supplies, Margaret joined them, her once red hair now silver, but her movements still efficient. Without asking questions, she began packing food provisions and warm clothing, understanding from their urgent activity that Josephine was being called away. The Shoshone winter camp, she guessed, recognizing the pattern of medical supplies Josephine was selecting. Yes, fever outbreak among the children. Margaret added several packages of herbs to the supply crate. "Take extra willow bark and yarrow, and the echinacea tincture we prepared last month." This easy cooperation reflected the partnership that had developed between them over the years. Margaret's practical knowledge of herbal medicine complemented Josephine's more formal training, creating an approach that bridged traditional and modern healing practices. Within 2 hours, the medical wagon was prepared, loaded with everything Josephine might need for treating a serious fever outbreak. Charlie, now a capable man of 25, checked his weapons and provisions for the journey. The military scout waited impatiently, understanding that speed could mean the difference between life and death for the afflicted children. As Josephine prepared to depart, Gerald Tucker emerged from his blacksmith shop, wiping soot from his hands. Behind him stood his wife, Willow, the former Shoshone translator who had married into the Echo Canyon community 3 years earlier. Their young son, Sky, clung to his mother's skirts. "My cousin's band," Willow said simply, recognizing the destination from the preparations. "I should come. They will trust your medicine more readily with family present." Josephine nodded, grateful for the offer. Willow's presence would indeed facilitate both communication and trust. Though Josephine's Shoshone vocabulary had expanded significantly over the years, nuanced medical explanations still required a skilled translator. Patrick approached as the final preparations were completed. He embraced Josephine warmly, the gesture conveying both affection and confidence. "You'll do what needs doing," he said simply. "You always have." The small caravan departed shortly before noon. Josephine and Willow in the medical wagon, Charlie and the military scout riding alongside. As they left the canyon that had become home, Josephine found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The massacre that had claimed her family and first future now seemed like something that had happened to another person entirely. She remembered the terror and grief, acknowledged their formative impact on her life, but no longer felt defined by that single traumatic event. Instead, she measured her life by what had come after, the family she had found, with the Donovans, the community they had built at Echo Canyon, and the countless lives she had touched through both trading and healing, the Territorial Medical Commission, the governor's recognition, the trust of native bands who had every reason to reject white assistance. These were not accomplishments she could have imagined while huddled in that flour barrel, listening to death claim everyone she loved. Yet the path between that moment and this one now seemed almost inevitable in retrospect, as if surviving had set her feet on a road that could only lead here. 2 days later, they arrived at the Shoshone winter camp to find a community in crisis. 28 children and several adults lay suffering from the fierce fever, their traditional remedies proving insufficient against this particular illness. The band's healer, an elderly man with deep knowledge of plant medicine, greeted Josephine with the respect of one practitioner to another. Through Willow's translation, he explained the progression of symptoms and the treatments already attempted. Josephine listened carefully, recognizing the condition as a particularly virulent form of mountain fever she had encountered previously. Together, they developed a treatment approach that combined herb-brought medicines with local herbs known to reduce fever. For the next week, they worked tirelessly, moving from patient to patient, teaching family members proper care techniques and adjusting treatments based on individual responses. Slowly, tentatively, the tide began to turn. Children's fevers broke, adults regained strength. The spread of infections slowed and finally stopped. As the crisis subsided, the band's chief invited Josephine to join their council fire, an honor rarely extended to outsiders and almost never to white women. Through Willow, he expressed his people's gratitude, but also something deeper: recognition of her unique position between worlds. "You understand the white man's medicine," he said, "but you respect our ways also. You do not come to change us, but to help us survive in changing times." His words captured the essence of what Josephine had become. Not simply a survivor of tragedy, not merely a trader or healer, but a bridge between cultures during a period of profound transition on the American frontier. As she prepared to return to Echo Canyon the following day, Josephine gazed up at stars, brilliant in the cold mountain sky. The young bride from Missouri, with her dreams of a simple married life in Oregon, could never have envisioned this future. Yet she had found something perhaps more valuable than what had been lost: purpose born from tragedy, strength forged in adversity, and a unique place in a rapidly changing world. The flour barrel that had hidden and saved her had long since been repurposed, its staves used to frame the garden behind Echo Trading Post, where she now grew medicinal herbs. From vessel of terror to source of healing, the transformation of the barrel mirrored her own journey from victim to healer, from passenger to guide, from someone defined by what she had survived to someone known by what she had built. As dawn broke over the mountains, painting the snow-capped peaks with rose and gold, Josephine Donovan prepared for the journey home, carrying with her new knowledge of healing, new connections with the Shoshone people, and renewed certainty that the unexpected path her life had taken was exactly where she was meant to be. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.